If someone had told me that I was going to see two guys in shabby uniforms dragging my teenage son out of our backyard in the middle of a barbecue on a sunny Sunday, I would have laughed and said, "You're watching too much Netflix." But no, it wasn't a series. It was my life itself becoming a script for a special episode of Dateline. It was supposed to be just another quiet day. Meat on the grill, homemade farofa, music at the perfect volume, loud enough to annoy the woman in front of the house, but low enough to avoid a real fine. My son, just turned 16, was wearing shorts, a cap, and holding a Coca-Cola in his hand as he helped turn the skewers. Then she appeared. Sunglasses, neighborhood committee t-shirt, that plastered-on smile that never promises anything good. She crossed the street as if she owned the neighborhood. I didn't even pay much attention, I confess. I thought she was going to do her usual patrol. The garbage is out of order. The garden has to be symmetrical. This music doesn't follow the rules of happy suburbia. But this time, she brought reinforcements. Two guys, unmarked uniforms, toy guns that looked like they'd been bought on AliExpress, and that look of someone who thinks they've watched too many action movies and decided they were ready to defend their country. From roast beef. No warning, no request, no good morning. One of them points at my son and tells him to get out of the yard. The other pulled the boy's arm. I froze. It took seconds, but it felt like my brain had crashed like an old computer. And then the screaming started. My neighbor on the left appeared with her head sticking out of the window. The neighbor on the right, who always complains about the smell of our grill, was filming with his cell phone. Meanwhile, the two security guards from the neighborhood association pushed my son down the sidewalk as if he were a criminal caught red-handed roasting illegal sausage. The woman followed behind, arms crossed, saying things like, "We need to keep order in the neighborhood." Order was apparently more important than common sense, or sanity, or real laws. My son is one of the most polite teenagers I know. It's not even because he's my son, but he has a patience I've never had. When he saw that they were taking him away, he tried to explain. "I live here. That's my father over there." But nobody listened. She just shook her head with that "I'm doing society a favor" look. And all because, according to the woman, he looked suspicious. The reason? Cap turned backwards and a Nike t-shirt. In other words, a breathing teenager. But what she didn't know, and this is where the good part begins, is that my son is the son of the city's police chief. Yes, that same guy who goes to barbecues with his uniform in the trunk, who knows every policeman in town by their first name, and who was 2 quarters away, buying charcoal at the market. Luck? Karma? Divine providence? I don't know. All I know is that less than 5 minutes after the two dummies tried to take my son to the association headquarters, 3 real police cars were pulling up in front of my house. Not the kind with decorative lights, but the kind that make the neighborhood think they're recording cops right there. The chief got out of the car without even closing the door. He looked at his son, looked at me, looked at the 2 fake sheriffs, and asked, in that voice that gives even a pit bull the creeps, "What is going on here?" The woman, still smiling madly, tried to explain herself. She said it was just a preventive approach, that she was protecting the neighborhood, that the boy seemed out of context. She even used the word element, as if my son were an unsolved equation. The 2 policemen even tried to show some documents, but the wallet was plastic. The badge looked like a toy, and one of the guys was shaking so much he looked like he was going to faint from the heat. No one there was an official. One of them, we later found out, was the boyfriend of the woman's niece. The other, nobody knows who he was yet. Meanwhile, the real police were checking everything, including the recording from my home security camera. Spoiler, they filmed everything. The break-in, the forced approach, the attempt to pose as an authority. And the look on her face, oh, the look on her face when she realized she'd done all this to the son of the chief of police. If regret could kill, she would already be mourned by the neighborhood community with a tuna sandwich and a glass of juice. But the woman didn't lower her head. She didn't apologize. She didn't stay silent. She did worse. She doubled her bet. She said she was taking care of public safety because the city's police were inefficient. She said that the neighbors were scared. Of course, only she saw these neighbors. Maybe they were imaginary, and that she was trying to save the morale of the neighborhood before it became a mess like other neighborhoods. By now, the whole neighborhood had come out to watch the show. Some whispered. Others were filming. One couple even brought popcorn. And I stood there, looking at this scene, thinking, how did we get to this point? How can someone feel so comfortable, so sure of their impunity, that they drag a teenager out of someone else's yard, thinking they're going to win a prize for it? That was just the first part. But if you think that after that the woman collected herself, kept quiet, and apologized, friend, you don't know that kind of person. She did worse. And in the next part, I'll tell you what happened when she tried to justify all of this in an official meeting, with a microphone and everything, and you won't believe what she said. On Monday, the woman showed up at the association meeting as if nothing had happened, wearing a beige blazer, her hair up in a bun, flawless makeup, and a smile that looked like it had been glued on with Super Bonder. In her mind, the weekend had been just another success in her mission to save the community's morale. She was completely unaware that she was being investigated for abuse of authority, ideological falsehood, and who knows how many other crimes that could have been committed in a situation that started with a barbecue and ended with a police car. She walked among the neighbors like some kind of evening star. You know that person who believes so much in her role as a hero that she thinks any criticism is envy? Well then, that was the level of alienation. And to top it off, she had the nerve to open the meeting by asking for the floor with the phrase, "It is with a heavy heart that I come to justify my actions." A heavy heart, as if she had been forced to pull a teenager by the collar from her backyard, as if the problem was the way society sees those who act, and not those who invade. She said she took the action to protect the neighborhood. He said that he had received anonymous reports of suspicious activity involving young people who didn't belong to the community. He said that, at a time when public security is failing, it is the association's role to act preventively. The audience, which had previously watched in silence, began to react. Some snorted, others laughed. Some even got up from their chairs and said they wouldn't hear another word out of her. But the icing on the cake came when she said, with all the calm in the world, that perhaps the real issue was the type of behavior that certain young people were engaging in, which inevitably arouses concern in the watchful eyes of those who love this community. It was a polite and cowardly way of saying that my son deserved what happened, because according to her, he didn't seem trustworthy. It wasn't about attitudes. It was about his presence, the color of his skin, the way he dressed. The simple fact that he existed in a space that she, in her sick mind, considered her personal domain. The president of the association tried to interrupt, but she raised her voice, saying that it was her right to expose what many people there thought and were afraid to say out loud. She played the "I'm just saying what everyone else thinks" card, that old excuse that racists love to use when confronted. It was the theater of oppression, disguised as community zeal. In the audience, things began to heat up. One of the residents, the gentleman from the corner house, the one who always wore a cap and slippers with knee socks, raised his hand. When he was given the microphone, he said with the calm of someone who has seen a lot of crap in his life, "My 8-year-old granddaughter was playing with the boy who was taken. Now she's afraid to go out in the street. Do you think that's protecting the neighborhood? Creating trauma in a child?" The woman didn't even blink. She replied that fear is sometimes necessary to establish respect. It was at this point that the mood took a turn for the worse. Several residents started shouting, demanding explanations. The meeting turned into a mini civil riot. There were even people banging on the table, but even with all that, the woman didn't back down. On the contrary, she made a point of ending her speech by saying that she would continue to do whatever it took to keep the values of the neighborhood intact. Values that apparently included violence, authoritarianism, and prejudice disguised as good intentions. Outside, a team of journalists was already waiting. Someone had leaked the video of what had happened to the local press, and it was already circulating on social media. The headline? Mother denounces abusive approach by community security guards against teenage son at family event. And that was enough to send the woman into panic mode. Because it was one thing to rule the neighborhood with her little book of ridiculous rules, it was another to be seen as a villain by the whole city, with her image plastered all over the mayor's Facebook page, being questioned about racism, abuse of power, and ideological falsehood. The mask was starting to crack, but she still thought she could glue the pieces together with arrogance and ready-made speeches. But what she didn't know was that a real investigation had already begun. Because the chief of police, the father of the boy who was dragged away, wasn't just a big shot with a badge. He was the kind of man who didn't take it lying down when someone messed with his property. And the woman had touched the wrong spot, in the wrong way, at the wrong time. She was still savoring the last sips of her lactose-free cappuccino when 3 black cars pulled up in front of her house. No sirens, no rushing, just the icy calm of someone who knows exactly what they've come for. They were discreet, cold, and meticulous. One after the other, the officers got out of their vehicles, all wearing those heavy vests and with the features of someone who has seen too much to be impressed by the arrogance of a suburbanite who thinks she's the sheriff. She even tried to keep her pose. She opened the door with that automatic, almost rehearsed smile that looked like something out of a constipation commercial. But it wasn't until the first policeman pulled out a search and seizure warrant that her scarlet red lipstick seemed to disappear from her face. And it wasn't just one warrant. There were 3. One for her home, one for the Residents Association, and another for her personal laptop. The woman tried to argue, of course. She uttered classic phrases like, "This is absurd. I'm a respectable citizen. I have influential friends." But no one was there to listen to her inflated ego. They were there to uphold the law, the same one she claimed to defend while fabricating a parallel world where rules only applied to others. What they found in her house was a veritable collection of petty abuses. Falsified documents, invented association minutes, a folder labeled security projects with plans for community approach, photos of neighbors marked with adjectives like hostile, potential threat, repeat suspect. And in the middle of these files was my son, a photo of him, taken without authorization, with absurd notes next to it, such as observe movements, monitor visits. That wasn't a zealous neighbor. This was an obsessive-compulsive with delusions of grandeur, a mixture of stalker and neighborhood dictator, a clinical case that escaped being diagnosed through sheer luck, or because no one had the courage to stand up to her. While they searched the house, the chief of police, the boy's father, stood outside. His posture was rigid. His arms were crossed, and he looked like he was trying with all his might not to turn the situation into something personal. But it was personal. She had humiliated his son. And not only that, she had done it in front of cameras, witnesses, and even had the audacity to say at a meeting that she would do it again. On the side of the Residents Association, the agents found more rot than a poorly ventilated basement. Forged reports, fake letters sent on behalf of residents, veiled threats to neighbors who didn't follow the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. And the icing on the cake, a list of supposed security volunteers that included the 2 idiots who dragged my son out of the yard as if they were secret KGB agents. The woman was summoned to testify, and during the interrogation, of course, she tried to play the martyr. She said that her only intention was to restore the lost values of the community, that her fight was against social degradation, disrespect for norms, and lack of civic involvement, that my son's presence at the barbecue represented a deviation from typical neighborhood behavior. The delegate in charge just let out a sigh, the kind that sums up the tiredness of dealing with people who think they're above collective sanity. Do you really think you can decide who deserves to be in a neighborhood based on their appearance? She asked, and the woman replied with the phrase that has become the symbol of her own downfall. If I don't do it, who will? With that sentence, she basically signed her moral condemnation. It was the perfect summary of all her arrogance, of authoritarianism disguised as concern. She wasn't acting on behalf of anyone. She was just another ordinary person who had a taste of power and decided to abuse it until it became a police case. The newspapers started lining up. Headlines appeared all over the state. Resident poses as authority and assaults teenager in fake community operation. The photos showed her being taken to give evidence, without makeup, without posing, without control of the script. For the first time, the script wasn't hers. She wasn't in charge, and that destroyed her more than any accusation. At my son's school, his classmates treated him like a hero, but he didn't find it funny. The truth is that he was afraid to leave the house for days. He had anxiety attacks, nightmares, and insomnia, because it's one thing to deal with bullying or school fights. It's quite another to be kidnapped in your own backyard by two uniformed lunatics and see your life become the subject of national debate. All this because a woman decided that her paranoia was more legitimate than the well-being of the people around her. And the worst part? She still hadn't learned her lesson. Even with the world falling apart around her, she sent messages to neighbors trying to justify what she had done. She said she was the victim of a conspiracy, that the system was against her, that it was only a matter of time before everything went back to normal. The problem was that her normal was to live in a world where she was in charge of everything. And that world was over. The extraordinary assembly was called, with an urgency that not even the city's political scandals had provoked. Her name appeared on all the local news networks, in neighborhood WhatsApp groups, and even in the stories of neighborhood teenagers who dubbed the event the Trial of the Concrete Queen. The venue chosen was the municipal school gymnasium, because, according to the town hall, the association hall couldn't accommodate the size of the public interest. Translation: the shack was so big that they needed bleachers. At 7 o'clock on the dot, the woman entered as if she were going to attend an awards ceremony. Face made up, pearl necklace, white blazer as if she were a bridesmaid. She walked slowly, trying to disguise the weight of the scandal with the posture of someone who believes she is about to be applauded by a blind audience. She still thought the problem was one of image, not character. And like anyone who lives in their own delusions, she believed she could turn the tide with a good speech. But this time, there was no microphone to save her. The mayor opened the assembly with the serious tone of someone who had had enough, but had to follow protocol. He explained the reasons for calling the meeting: formal complaints of abuse of authority, falsification of documents, discrimination, and, the icing on the cake, usurpation of public office. He spoke clearly, without beating around the bush. It was the kind of speech that came with the smell of a sentence. Residents began to speak out, each with a story more absurd than the next. There were neighbors saying that the woman sent written warnings with made-up fines. One lady revealed that she received a nighttime visit from her surveillance team because she left a light on after 11 p.m. A new resident said he was warned not to go around in a sweatshirt because it gave a bad impression. That's right, sweatshirts, that comfortable garment that has become a fashion crime in the empire of suburbanized terror. And then it was my turn. I went on stage not wanting to be a spokesperson for anything, but someone had to tell me in detail what she had done to my son. I looked at the audience, took a deep breath, and told them everything. The moment she appeared in our backyard, the two men who accompanied her, the way they dragged an innocent teenager into the middle of a family lunch. I talked about the sleepless nights, the fear he felt of his own street, the psychological terror she planted with smiles and speeches about community decency. The woman remained silent the whole time, her head held high, as if she were the victim of a moral lynching. It was a pathetic performance, a theater without an audience. The climax of the evening, however, came when the municipal prosecutor took to the stage with a USB stick. On it was a video recovered from her home's security cloud, material collected legally, thanks to the search warrant. The content? A home recording in which she gave strategic instructions to her two henchmen. In the video, she said, in no uncertain terms, "Let's approach the boy. He's the son of that man from the blue house. He always barbecues. He thinks he can do anything. Let's see if he still has that freedom after a scare." Pause. Laughter. "Just don't leave any marks, okay?" The gym fell into a silence so deep you could hear the security guards breathing at the door. No excuse could stand up to that. No victim pose. No ready-made phrase. The mayor took the floor. His voice didn't rise in pitch, but every word was a dry punch. "You are formally removed from any position you hold within the Residents' Association. You are prohibited from attending any meeting or exercising any function related to the administration of the community. A request for criminal prosecution will be sent to the public prosecutor's office based on the evidence collected." She didn't answer. She just lowered her head, her pearl necklace shaking with the movement of her neck. It was the final collapse of a character that had been built on false authority, abusive surveillance, and a blind certainty of impunity. The last image I have of her that night is with her back turned, leaving the side of the gym while the lights were still on. She left without looking at anyone, without apologizing, without trying to save her own reputation, perhaps because she finally knew she had nothing left to save. The next day, the sidewalk outside her house dawned with a handwritten banner. "This neighborhood doesn't need dictators. The association has undergone a complete overhaul. Meetings now have community control. Positions rotate, and the word security has returned to its rightful meaning. Protection, not oppression, disguised as care." Her house was put up for sale 2 months later. They said it was for personal reasons, but everyone knew that, in reality, she couldn't stand living in a place where no one believed her lies. As for my son, well, he's back to barbecuing in the yard. And now he wears his cap turned backwards, with more pride than ever, because he's learned the hard way that there are people who will try to rip you out of your space just because you exist. But he also learned that with truth, courage, and a decent security camera, you can put suburban tyrants in their place. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.